was much the product of one man's personality and vision, George Eastman, who founded the company 100 years earlier. Kodak was the vertically integrated business model firm. It made everything itself. At Kodak Park, Rochester manufacturing facility, boxcars of raw materials entered at one end and packaged film rolled out the other. This ingrained self-sufficiency was born of hardship. In 1920, Eastman had a large shipment of film spoil from bad gelatin. After recalling all the bad film from his customers and replacing it, Eastman vowed that from then on he would control the alternatives. As a quality measure, Kodak started manufacturing gelatin, paper, silver halide, and just about anything else basic to the business. In the early 1980s, Japan's increasing presence in the film business and the growth of private label firm 3M and AGFA had eroded Kodak's position as a monopoly, shaving 10% off its previous market share. Kodak was caught competing on quality and brand name loyalty just as competitors had narrowed the quality gap, and the consumer marketplace was moving to value pricing. Cornelius Murphy, Kodak's senior VP for worldwide manufacturing in 1982 to 1986, undertook. Kodak worked under a 14 to 18% cost disadvantage relative to Fuji and Konica, his main Japanese competitors. He focused his plants by reducing film emulsion types, for example, from 200 in a plant in France to only 5, thereby increasing volume. He also attracted low value-add activities like the in-house carpenters, masons, cleaning crews, cafeteria workers, etc., and insourced all of them. That combination cut the gap in half. In 1986, when Murphy moved to take over Kodak's distribution, market research, procurement, and information systems, he brought to his new job a positive view of outsourcing. His choice of staffing would reflect that interest and prove central for the eventual decision to outsource Kodak's IS activities. The assembled group included Henry G. Fent, Alan E. Cummins, and Catherine M. Hubson. At Murphy's request, Henry Fent, the Director of Information Technology Management, initiated a study of IT cost structure. Fent brought in Professor Russell Ackoff from the University of Pennsylvania to help what was termed an idealized business redesign of an IT value chain. Basically a what-if look at the IT function unhampered by real-world constraints. Ackoff was a strong believer in a broadly participative problem-solving method. Over 250 IS employees were consulted by the task force, along with key IS internal customers, in preparing a vision of what they wanted for the organization to become. The 3-month study had 2 significant recommendations. First, integrate computing services with telecommunications. Secondly, consolidate the 1,300 IS employees and the 3 major data centers in Rochester that reported to Fent to handle the expected growth in the business and reap the efficiencies of common standards and economies of scale. At that time, Kodak was inefficiently running 13 disjointed SNA data communications networks and 70 different CICS transaction database images, each requiring separate and expensive programming maintenance efforts. Ideally, Kodak wanted to have an integrated IT infrastructure that could seamlessly manage a global enterprise. But the team concluded that because of the fragmented manner by which IT was managed by corporate function and geography, that Kodak IT lacked a compelling long-term global unity or strategic direction. Fent broke this problem into 5 areas: mainframe computing, mid-range computing, telecommunications, personal computer operations, and application development. Spending over $5 million working with Dallas-based Electronic Data Systems, or EDS, for the mainframe and telecom areas, and many other vendors in the other 3 areas, he compiled a strategic assessment of Kodak's IT prospects. These new studies indicated that Kodak was in reasonable shape, not in a crisis, but had major areas for improvement. They recommended migration to a new technology base, increased labor productivity, better leveraging of the company's buying power on a worldwide basis, and a centralized system support infrastructure. At this point, it became clear that running, quote, glass houses, internal phone companies, or PC support centers was part of Kodak's core. In 1988, Murphy put Kathy Hudson in place of Kodak's first corporate-wide CIO, or Chief Information Officer. Her mandate was to consolidate IT worldwide and take cost out of the equation of delivering quality services. A dynamic, energetic leader, as one of her colleagues put it, quote, "If you look up change agent in the dictionary, you'll find her picture right there." November 16, 1988, Fendt presented to Hudson his recommendations for what he termed, quote, Partnership Innovation Process, PIP, towards establishing and managing strategic technology alliances. PIP was to be more than writing up a spec and contracting to the lowest bidder. She brought off on the idea of value-added partnerships as superior to internal operations or straight contracting, sold it to management and her report staff, and drove it to fruition. Wired into the Kodak power structure, she was a spark as well as a catalyst for Kodak's move. For Hudson, strategic partnering was appropriate for both theoretical and practical reasons. She was a believer in the, quote, vertical disintegration theory of University of Chicago professor George Stigler. Stigler, a Nobel laureate, believed that as markets expanded, economies of scale diminished, and that companies ought to let specialized companies handle certain corporate functions. $1 capital allocation for data center consolidation when the company might better use the funds for its core business, like building film manufacturing capacity in the People's Republic of China. Hudson did not come up with running a data center and had none of the vested interest baggage of a traditional IT manager. Even when the plan to bid out IT service was criticized and ridiculed within Kodak, Hudson stayed clear and focused on the business case and unwaveringly steered the process forward. Overall, Hudson and Fendt identified 4 sets of interests they wanted to be fulfilled by any prospective technology alliance. Shareholder value, achieve financial benefits through staff-level cuts and off-balance sheet financing. This goal was the locomotive that pulled the deals forward. Kodak moved 700 people to its IT partners, dropping over $35 million in salaries, and lowered its IT capital budget from $40 million a year to $5 million a year. They did not, for New York sales tax reasons, initially sell their equipment directly to their partners, merely transferring the operations. Productivity aimed for quantum level of improvement from partnering with a world-class technology company. This meant significant service level improvements coupled with service cost reductions. Fendt and Hudson knew that at least 2/3 of the gains would come just from the consolidation of data centers. Quality of work life. Ensure employees transferred to the outsourcing provider would keep salaries and benefits and gain a broader career path. This was important to get employee cooperation and turned out to have a significant impact on vendor selection. Positioning for the future. Allow internal IS to focus on high added value work and enable it to benefit from beta testing and increased upstream input of requirements to vendors. For IBM, outsourcing carried several major real and perceived challenges. Since the mid-1960s, IBM made its money from what it termed technology, building large mainframe computers. Some company executives thought that entering the outsourcing business would wreck the mainframe cash cow. Conrad's had to make the rounds and diffuse the argument. What actually concerned him was how to price complicated contracts when IBM had no prior external operational experience, and then what would IBM do with the redundant assets that any prospective operation would acquire. IBM certainly didn't need any of the buildings, mainframes, or personnel that it would pick up with a general outsourcing business. McDowell consulted with Harry Kavitas, recently appointed by George Fisher as Kodak CFO, who was the head of the IBM Credit Corporation. Harry told him that it would not be difficult to dispose of the machines or buildings. As for the people, Conrad's got IBM plans and control staff to approve wedge headcount, a temporary bubble in his plan to allow bringing the new people on board. Conrad's clearly saw the major strategic value to IBM of outsourcing via the 5 to 10 year guaranteed revenue stream. IBM hadn't had the luxury of that kind of financial stability since it took its mainframes off lease in the 1970s and started selling them outright. Once it won an outsourcing arrangement as the incumbent supplier, IBM would have a favored position to add additional services like networking or applications development. And over the duration of the contract term, IBM could consolidate services, reducing its costs and improving its margins. Outsourcing also offered Conrad's an important tactical defensive advantage. Although they referred to it as a facilities management, a goofy term with all the pizzazz of a stale cigar, EDS was already actively approaching prospects and offering timely, error-free, cheaper digital photography operations. Conrad's was certain a new market was emerging that would significantly reduce IBM's traditional control over its key accounts. Having worked through the issues with the Hibernia case, IBM was emotionally prepared for the Kodak opportunity. Kodak account executive Paul Graves went to McDowell with the news that Kodak was in the market to outsource PC support and that the local IBM team wanted to bid for it. He got approval. After reviewing the 17 responses to to the RFP, Kathy Hudson chose Business Land in a 5-year contract as they partner to maintain the Kodak's 35,000 personal computers and handle the purchase and installation of the 500 new ones per month that Kodak needed. McDowell's challenge was to quickly put together a team to assess Kodak's needs and produce a bid. He went to a full-course press to win the account, bringing in a dozen of the best people he could muster throughout IBM to work, act, eat, and bond with the Kodak team. IBM's strategy was to get Kodak, and particularly Kathy Hudson, to develop trust. IBM flew Hudson to Boulder, Colorado to visit Irv Schauer's IES organization there to demonstrate that IBM had the competence to run a high-availability, high-performance, lean-staffed, mission-critical data center. It was clear that Schauer's operation was way better than Kodak's. Insiders to the talk say that IBM offered a surprising degree of flexibility. IBM was very open to Kodak's overall input on the prospective data center and was willing to run with Kodak's own choices for software standards. EDS was willing to build a new data center for Kodak, but wanted it to adhere to the internal corporate standards and, in essence, clone EDS's existing and successful information processing center arrangement. In mid-February 1989, Kathy Hudson called an all-hands-on-deck meeting at the Rochester Kodak headquarters tower of her reporting lines to announce that she was considering outsourcing. The implication was that some, if not most, of the attendees would be working for another company by the end of the year. The reactions, shock, disbelief, and anger, were expected and palpable. For most employees, Kodak was like motherhood and apple pie. To them, a job at Kodak was a job forever, and when they heard the news, they were just plain scared. Kodak's IS people were uncomfortable with having their fate handed over to EDS. IBM appeared to these worried employees as their HR white knight. She also set up a steering process to address IS customer concerns, communicate project status, and set up an application migration process. Eventually, 140 critical applications out of a portfolio of 800 were identified and their performance requirements determined. Liz Gray from CMI acted in the Kodak-IBM negotiation as mediator and facilitator. IBM especially credits her with making the critical difference in structuring the alliance. Her influence kept IBM from maintaining a positional approach to the contract, but just because Kodak was looking for a win-win outcome did not mean that it was just going to roll over to reach an agreement. In fact, Kodak bypassed IBM and chose DEC for the Telstar networking agreement. Hovey was an extremely tough and very demanding customer, making IBM stretch for the contract. But he was fair. Hovey recognized that IBM needed to make a good profit to keep this new venture stable and offered Kodak support to help grow IBM's business. Lacking an IS background, he also made it easier for IBM by taking a strictly business point of view. The contract for a 10-year agreement, valued some say at over $1 billion, was a scant 11 pages long. This probably set a brevity record for IBM. Kodak posted the bans in July 1989. After waiting the compulsory 60-day interval, Kodak turned over the operation of 5 of its U.S. data centers to IBM at the beginning of October 1989. At a meeting in New York the following February, Howard Anderson of the Yankee Group named it outsourcing, providing a trendy term for popularizing the arrangement. Not everyone was thrilled with the match. EDS was shocked. As Conrads marveled, it wasn't just a shot across their bow, it was a howitzer. It served notice on them and the industry that IBM was a player to be reckoned with. Observers took a mixed view of the events. Financial analysts generally viewed it positively. It was an example of a company unburdening itself of low-value added fixed cost infrastructure commitments. It takes basic trust and a lot of work. No one says it comes easily, as in any good marriage the couple brings out the best in each other. Kodak IT service levels were reportedly improved from a system reliability of about 96% to 99.5%. Processing costs are claimed to have dropped between 30 and 40%, leaving its management team free to focus on more strategic issues than manning the help desk. IBM views its relationship with Kodak as the model they aspire to reach in new engagements. The data center that IBM built outside of Rochester in Greece, New York, and runs to support its Kodak business is several percent more efficient than any other within IBM. Kodak has persuaded and influenced IBM to become more responsive and a flexible provider of service, looking with a more long-term and strategic view of its relationship. It was a unique mix of people, leaders, visionaries, negotiators, and ambassadors, like individual tumblers in a complicated combination lock that produced the foundation for a deal whose success has yet to be replicated. Nowadays, though, Kodak is in a little bit of a sticky situation. In January 2009, Kodak unexpectedly posted a $137 million loss and planned to cut 4,500 jobs. In September 2011, Kodak hired a restructuring firm for advice, and shares fell more than 80%. On January 19, 2012, Kodak files for bankruptcy and becomes delisted on the New York Stock Exchange, ending the day at 36 cents a share. Since then, Kodak has announced it was exiting the digital camera, printer, inkjet presses, workflow software scanning, kiosk, and printer businesses before selling its film division. Kodak gained incredible leverage from the innovative IBM deal and prospered through the 1990s. But the simple answer for their failure is that Kodak was a legacy company too heavily invested in analog print technology to be able to embrace digital photography when it arrived, clearly suggesting a monumental lack of corporate vision. However, the simple answer ignores the inconvenient fact. In 1975, Kodak was the first major brand to launch a range of affordable digital cameras. It's not so much that Kodak failed to respond to the digital camera challenge as it failed to provide a full and satisfactory answer. Actually, it tried very hard with a number of solutions, which included chemicals and medical testing equipment. Finally, it had settled upon consumer and commercial printers, but unfortunately long after Xerox and Hewlett-Packard had sewn up that market. Unlike one-trick pony Polaroid, which faced the same digital challenge, Kodak had plenty going for it. It just wasn't enough. Things might have been very different if Kodak had possessed the ruthless entrepreneurial culture to exploit its first-mover advantage in digital cameras, the sort of culture that drove its founder George Eastman back in the 19th century, but it did not. The irony about technology brands The irony about technology brands is the fact that when they end, it is because they became too brittle and resistant to the process of innovation that got them there in the first place. Why worry about the day after tomorrow when tomorrow looks just fine?